Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I'm Dana Nickel, and I'm with a news associate with the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents, and I'm here with Kate Nakamura, who is also a news associate with the AFC, and we're doing an interview with Bill Gentile. He's an Emmy award-winning journalist and documentarian with an accomplished career, and his most recent publication will be his memoirs, Wait For Me, True Stories of Love, War, and Rock and Roll. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Bill.
There it is.
Oh, fantastic.
That's the book. That's the cover. This comes in hard copy, which this is. Um, there's a soft cover, and it's out in Kindle as well. I hope to this fall semester. I teach at American University in Washington D.C., and I'm hoping to have the time to do an audio version of it. I plan on reading the book myself for people who want to hear my voice, and maybe they have long drives ahead of them, or spend time in their cars, or just like to listen to books as opposed to read them. They'll have access to that. I also plan to do a Spanish language version of it. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interest in Latin America and the Caribbean about the topic, especially now since Nicaragua is so much back in the news, and we have this crisis on the southern frontier with Mexico that includes a lot of Central Americans, Nicaraguans, Salvadorans, Hondurans, Guatemalans. So it's the I think the timing of the book, not by my all by intent by any means, but the timing of the book is fortuitous in the sense that there's greater interest or renewed interest in Central America.
Yeah, great. If you want to just hop right into questions about that. So the book is very relevant right now. And what was the final deciding factor that pushed you to finally compile all of your stories into one book? Why share these stories now?
That's a good question, Kate. And it's I think the answer is multifaceted. I'm at the point of my career, my professional career. I've been a journalist since 1977. I first went to Mexico in 1977 after having completed coursework for a master's degree at Ohio University in Athens, Ohio. I was supposed to be there at an English language newspaper called the Mexico City News. I was supposed to be there for a 10-week internship, then return home, write a long thesis paper about the trip, and look for a job, for a job in the United States. I stayed at the newspaper for a year, and but shortly after that started to string for United Press International, freelancer string. We kind of use those terms interchangeably. They're a little bit different. I can explain that if you like later. But so I stayed in Mexico for 4 years. During that time, I covered the 1979 Sandinista revolution in Nicaragua. And that's where the seed of a lot of this book comes from. From that experience, it was my first war. As a matter of fact, the second chapter in the book is called First War, and it deals with that insurrection. And that was really my political awakening. I had never seen conflict before. I'd never seen armed conflict. I'd never seen people take up arms to accomplish political change. I had never seen a social, political, military revolution like that. The Sandinista revolution was a major occurrence in Latin America, one of the largest occurrences, one of the most important, significant, long-lasting occurrences to happen since the Cuban Revolution, which is in 1959. And of course, this happened at the tail end of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, before the collapse of the Soviet Union. And unfortunately, Central America became one of the last battlegrounds of that Cold War, and its people, and the people of many countries in Central America, particularly Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala, paid a very, very high price in terms of human cost, in many other ways, because of the conflicts that ensued after the Sandinista revolution. So, I started to write the book because, that was 40 some years ago, and these stories that I've accumulated over all this time stories have a way of like pushing themselves out of you, or like kind of like scratching inside, trying to get out, trying to get told, trying to get disseminated, read or listened to. And I've been dealing with that for quite a long time. I started to write the book a number of years ago, in pieces in my journal, just taking notes down and keeping track of what was happening in my life. I started out as a print correspondent with the Mexico City News and United Press International, and by the mid 1980s had turned into a photojournalist. And over the years, I've accumulated tens of thousands of images, color slides, black and white images, and notes that I wrote, footnotes on, or captions for the pictures. So I have all of this material that until now had been stashed away in footlockers, in reporters' notebooks, like this one, for decades. And this was an incredible source. And I had the sense that this was going to happen while I was writing these notes years ago. I had the sense that someday I would want to go back into these notebooks and revisit the times and the places that I had during my professional career. And that's exactly what happened. So my career told me that it was time to do this. The fact that Central America keeps returning to the news, to the front pages, to the television screens of our country, the fact that we keep receiving tens of thousands of immigrants coming to this country, partly because of the conflicts that happened decades ago in their own countries, and the resulting chaos that's ensued there, and partly because I realize that I've got way more days behind me than I have in front of me. So it's time to get this stuff down so that I can pass these lessons along to somebody. And we are right now, I understand that the previous presidential administration is no longer with us, at least not in the White House. But some of the legacy of that administration is still with us. And I think it's part of my endeavor here is to push back on what I consider to be these extremely irresponsible and dangerous notions that journalists are fake news and enemy of the people. I find that repugnant that any leader in this country would say that. But we've seen a lot of repugnant things happen in the previous administration, and I wanted to push back on that, and really hard, respectfully, but really, really hard. I teach a foreign correspondence course at American University. As a matter of fact, what I teach at American University is basically what I've been practicing for the last 40-some years. At American University, the School of Communication where I work, didn't have a photojournalism and social documentary course. I created it, and I teach it still. It didn't have a foreign correspondence course. I created it and teach it still. It didn't have anything about backpack journalism. I created that genre and brought the name to American University, and I teach it still. So I'm in a position now, including in partly because of my relationship with organizations like yours, like your organization. I have access to an audience that goes beyond my classes. I'm aside from being an academic advisor for your organization, I'm also the link between American University and the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting. As a matter of fact, I'm the one who established the link. I'm the one who helped engineer that. Then I'm a member of the board of directors of the Overseas Press Foundation in New York. So, I've got an opportunity to reach so many young people who want to do kind of the same thing that I did, maybe not conflict reporting. I would never encourage students to do that, but I would never, try to stop them from doing conflict reporting. So, again, it's about getting these stories out so that an entire new generation can read and understand the lessons that I have learned, so they don't have to create the wheel. My predecessors and I have done that already, and we can give these lessons to them so that they can do some of the same kind of work that we've done, and not make mistakes in the process. That's a bit of a long circuitous response to your question. I hope it wasn't too long.
No, it was great. Thank you. And kind of going off of that, you mentioned that stories do have a way of kind of scratching their way out of you as time goes on. Do you find that writing this book after several decades of service as a foreign correspondent was therapeutic for you in a way?
It was it was more than therapeutic, Dana. It was cathartic as well, because what happens is when you revisit, in my case, when I revisit the images that I made decades ago, when I read the letters that were sent back and forth from me to my family, from me to my colleagues, from the captions that I wrote for images, and I take great pride in having developed many of the skills that I was exposed to over the years, and one of them is writing. Although the latter part of my career is all about imagery. Writing is so critical to the craft. So when I revisited the captions that I wrote and the little posts that I put in my journal and so forth, I had an opportunity to kind of relive the experiences in my home, in front of a computer, surrounded by all of this raw material that I generated decades ago. And it was an opportunity to relive those issues, to relive those situations. Some of them very, very painful, some of them really, really gratifying, and going back and remembering the places, the times, the good times, the hard times, and taking a stepping back look at the fabric of my life, and because all of this material that's in the book that is still in the footlockers in my attic, they are part of the fabric of my life, and I had the extraordinary opportunity to go through them and to relive them and to figure out things about myself, about things about the stories that I covered, that I would not have done had I not revisited those images and those stories. So it was really a just an extraordinary journey of revisitation, of reflection, of figuring things out. You know.
Yeah. What have you taken away from finally compiling all these stories into one book? What lessons have you learned from yourself and from your time covering the different wars?
I think um, I think some of the most important things that I've learned is the the critical importance of uh, love and um, loyalty, um, the one's roots, um, how important it is to I guess to be able to see yourself um, in retrospect and reflect from those lessons. I've the traits I've learned about the traits, the characteristics that I now value so deeply, and I find to be so important in people: loyalty, trust, honesty, hard work. Those things are the lessons that I was taught when I was young, that I try to live up to as a professional, and that I want to remind people of, and myself of, for the rest of my days. Um, especially when you cover conflict, and as I say in the book, I don't pretend to be, a war correspondent. I don't pretend to be, a combat photographer. I have lots of colleagues who have done, who've taken greater risks, who've done more dangerous work than I have. And I say this in all respect to them. Um, um, but when I have covered, significant amounts of conflict in Central America, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Africa, in different places, and when you go through these experiences, when you cover things where your life is in danger, everything becomes magnified. Every decision you make becomes magnified. Everything you say is magnified, because there's so much at stake. And what's at stake is your life and the lives of others. So you just take everything. There's an enhanced, magnified level of contact, if you will.
Definitely. And you explained that overall the story does kind of talk about love. What do you think, in the context of writing your story, love really meant to you as you worked out there abroad?
You know, if you read the poem, the book starts out with a story about a couple of guys being killed after a firefight in Nicaragua. And then I have the introduction to the book and an author's note. In the introduction, I mentioned the fact that the book takes its title from a poem that was written by a Russian poet during World War II, and it became one of the most popular poems in the war. And it was a lot of people attributed to the fact that a lot of young men went to the front to fight against the Nazis. And it's called "Wait for Me," and it's about how the people who waited for this man, this poet who became a war correspondent, how they waited for him and how that guaranteed his return from the front lines alive. So I learned about how the love of people here, where I'm sitting. I'm in Western Pennsylvania right now, in my older brother's home, and I learned how the love of the people here, my family, helped bring me back home. And I learned how important that is, not just for my survival, but for the survival of others whose loved ones helped bring them back home. If you read the poem, it's really, really powerful. It's rather short. I won't bore you to tears by reading it now, but it's something you can understand why it became so important to young men pondering entering the war during the Second World War.
Was there someone in particular that you had in mind when you pulled that poem for the title of "Wait for Me"?
They're the main characters in the book, actually. I have two wives. I've had a first wife. I had a second wife. My first wife is Nicaraguan, and I met her shortly after the 1979 Sandinista revolution. She worked for the Sandinista government. Claudia is her name. And we were married in 1979. I was still working for United Press International and living in Mexico City. We eventually got married. I lived in Nicaragua from 1983 until 1990. We were married and we lived in Miami for a few years. We eventually separated and divorced. Claudia always waited for me. She helped edit this book, actually, because she became an editor for McGraw-Hill in Argentina. She was head of the book distribution, I think, there. So she read the whole book and corrected a lot of stuff for me. And my second wife is Cuban. It's really funny because I tell my students that, of course, in jest, that the job of foreign correspondent is, you go to these fabulously beautiful countries, you meet extraordinarily interesting people, and you marry them. That's the job, Of course, it's much more complex than that, and I say that only in jest, okay? But I met Esther in Havana while on assignment as well. This time for not UPI, but for Newsweek magazine. And Esther has waited for my return as well from Afghanistan, from Iraq. We were just talking about it on the drive from Washington, D.C. today to here in southwestern Pennsylvania outside of Pittsburgh. So these people waited for me. My mother waited for me. My older brother waited for me. My youngest brother waited for me. I have this whole extended family, this Italian immigrant family that waited for my return. There's a wonderful character in the book. She's no longer with us, but it's my great aunt's sister, my Aunt Carmela, okay? And Aunt Carmela was very, very devout, and um, I used to call her when I would go on what I anticipated would be exceptionally dangerous assignments to El Salvador. And El Salvador, the conflict in El Salvador was much more deadly and much more ferocious than either the Sandinista revolution in 1979 or the Contra War in Nicaragua for a number of different reasons. But every time I would go either on these long trips to the mountains of Nicaragua during the Contra War, with the Contras or with the Sandinistas, that I knew were going to be particularly perilous, or if I was going to El Salvador, which is at that time was really, really perilous, I would call my Aunt Carmela and say, "Okay, Aunt Carmela, do your job now. You have all these saints and saviors and so forth. Be connected. I got to get back." And she would, and who knows how much that worked, but it helped me. When you go to cover conflict, when you go to cover war, people like me who did it on a fairly frequent basis, and I can't speak for everybody, but I know that I developed this system of protection, or at least maintaining the illusion that I was protected by whatever, by prayers, by tokens, by amulets, by Aunt Carmela, whatever, to help maintain this illusion of invincibility. And in the case of Aunt Carmela, I think it seemed to work. So here I am. So.
Definitely. And you kind of, and it's in the title of the book, music is a very important part of your life, obviously. How did you carry music with you while you traveled as a foreign correspondent?
Well, at that time, I carried the music with me in cassettes. I think there were. Remember those things? They were about this big, plastic cassettes. I don't think that the discs were out yet. I think that we just had these little cassettes, and of course, we had them in my home as well. If you read the book, I discuss quite a bit La Bestia, which means in Spanish, it means the beast. And the beast, in my case, is or was a 1969 International Harvester Scout. It was a four-wheel drive vehicle. It's an off-road vehicle that, I had purchased in a place in California, and drove it down to Central America. And it was this, extraordinary 8-cylinder, big engine, four-wheel drive, fire engine red, a vehicle that took me across rivers, that up mountains, that were almost, an incline about that sharp. And I set up a really elaborate music system, big speakers. At that time they were like 8 feet tall. I put them in this vehicle, and I would drive around Nicaragua, looking for stories and trying to figure out where the war was taking us and so forth, and doing other stuff that was not conflict related, but working on pictures for my book. I also have done a book of photographs called Nicaragua. It's over 100 color pictures. And it was quite successful book, and it was all about Nicaragua, this beautiful agricultural country with really spontaneous, wonderful people in it. And of course, war was weaved through the book because sadly, war has been weaved through the history of Nicaragua since as long as anybody can remember. So it was not a war book, it was not a conflict book, but it had war, it had conflict in it. So, music became my companion, either when I was, driving around by myself, if my first wife and I were on our way to Masachapa, which is a fishing village on the Pacific coast. If I was driving around with one of my colleagues, we went everywhere in La Bestia because it had the muscle to get us where we wanted to go. Being a photojournalist is not just about being capable of making interesting pictures. That's part of it, of course. But particularly in situations like Central America, where the logistics are tough, and where you can't just fly to a place and get out of the plane and start working. Getting to places to be able to make those pictures sometimes can be 95% of the job. I mean, just getting to these places can be really tough. And because I had this vehicle, and of course because I had the time, I had the will, and I had the physical and mental stamina, I was able to get to these places to make those pictures. Other people who didn't have a vehicle like La Bestia and who didn't have the luxury of time or the physical and mental stamina to get there and stay there for weeks at a time, because that's how long it took me very often to cover the Contra War. It would take weeks at a time in the mountains, walking around with the troops in really, really dangerous situations to make pictures of war. And sometimes, you'd come out with stunningly powerful pictures, and sometimes you'd come out with just men walking through the jungle, the tropical highlands of Nicaragua, eating cold rice and beans, or killing a cow or a monkey to eat, and not much more. So it was a task. But through all of this, music is something that inspires me, that regenerates the memories from decades ago, that feeds my imagination, feeds my enthusiasm for the work, for the people, and it's just a connection to so much for me.
You never refer to yourself as a combat photographer or war correspondent, yet you did rush headfirst into these conflict zones, such as the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait and the Rwandan genocide. Why have you chosen not to label yourself in such a manner when you have bore witness to so much?
Well, I don't want to be seen as a guy who runs around bragging about what happened yesterday. I want people to understand my role in things that happened yesterday. I certainly do. But I don't want men and women who have done, more daring coverage in the field. I mean, look, after what happened in Central America, there's this thunderstorm out here, so you're going to hear that. I love thunderstorms. There's a part in the book that I'm alone on a beach in Masachapa, a small fishing village on the Pacific coast of the country, and I'm connected to a Walkman, and I can see lightning. Lightning is striking in the distance, and a storm's coming toward me, and it's the evening. It's not quite dark yet. And I'm listening to Roger Daltrey of the British rock band The Who, singing. Is from the album Quadrophenia, singing about love, rain, and the sea. And you see that? I mean, this is decades later, and when I hear thunder out there and I see lightning, it takes me back to Quadrophenia and Masachapa in Nicaragua. So, Kate, to answer your question, after Central America, one of the big conflicts that was happening was Kosovo. Remember that whole episode there? And it was really, really, this is in Eastern Europe, fall of the Soviet Union. People were fighting like crazy, and that was a really tough war. And I never made conflict my main thing. As a matter of fact, I before going into these situations, I always had to ask myself, what can I put on the table here? What can I bring to the table that is important? What important thing do I have to say that will move this story forward? Why will I go to this place to risk, my hands, my eyes, my legs, my life? What will I take to that story that's worth this risk? In Central America, the answer was it was easy for me. I had decided that the story there was so important because my country was directly involved in these countries, and it was up to my craft, the craft of journalism, that whose responsibility it was to take a look at what's happening there, to examine what's happening there, and to tell people in this country about what's happening there. It is our job, journalists' job, to examine these conflicts in foreign countries. We send troops, money, advisors, whatever, to these countries supposedly to preserve democracy and freedom. We've heard these stories before, as recently as the invasion in Iraq. We send these people there, and we do, the American people, because we support the political system that sends these men and women into these conflicts. But no one here, no one has ever seen the faces of collateral damage that we cause there, right? So it's our job, I think, journalists' job. That's what journalism is for, to examine what the consequences of these conflicts are, and to show the American people, okay, this is what your taxes are paying for. This is what our country is doing in other countries. That's what we should do. But in places like Kosovo, I didn't know anything about the country. I wasn't familiar with the situation. I didn't think that I could, add anything to move the story forward. So I decided not to go. I decided the risk was so much greater than what I could bring to the table. Okay. And I never envisioned, there was a time actually when I envisioned becoming, a combat photographer, a war photographer. I thought maybe this is the component. This is the slice of this profession that I want to pursue. And a really, really smart woman that I worked for, she was my editor at Newsweek magazine, Karen Malarkey. She's still around. She teaches up in New York. She's brilliant. I love her. She said, you're not about death. You're about, she said, you're about life. You're not about death. And she was right. And I decided not to take that route. So other people have, though. Other people have done really, really good work and have decided that that's the route that they wanted to take, and that's fine. But I'm not one of them. I want my work to be more multifaceted. I want to write. I want to do documentaries. I want to do the things that I want to teach. I want to do all of those things. I don't want to be just following, dead people around for the rest of my career. I've done that.
And going off of that, you talk about all these experiences that you've had and how you've followed dead people around previously in your career. How did you find your center and cope with some of the things that you were faced with reporting on while you were traveling?
I think the people that do this, you have to keep in mind, okay, why am I here? Why am I doing this? Right? What's the story? Why am I here? Why am I doing this? And it can be this career, particularly covering conflict, can be really, really, really taxing, and it can take a real toll on you. But you've got to keep in mind, and I understood this while it was happening. Actually, I understood that if I let this the dead people impact me so much that I was not going to be any use to the living people. You get to a point, I think, if you allow this stuff to impact you too much, then you cease to become an effective communicator. You cease to become what you wanted to be. My job is not to be hurt, damaged, made incapacitated by my work. My job is to do my work, is to get this stuff out there so that I can inform people. If I allow what I'm seeing and what I'm doing to impact me, and I've seen this happen with other people, some of them don't make it out of it, and they cease to be what they're supposed to be. They cease to be communicators because they become casualties, and you can't become a casualty. And there's no gray matter here. There's no gray area here. It's like either black or white. You're either effective or you're not. And you have to keep that in mind, because once you become a casualty, you're kind of done.
Are there some stories in this book that were particularly harder to tell for you, or maybe that you considered not even adding to the book?
There's a story. It's a small portion of the story about a kid that I was on patrol once with the Sandinista army in the mountains, and they had troops moved through the mountains in single file, and that single file line could be a mile and a half long or longer, depending on how big the group is of soldiers. And I typically stationed myself behind the explorers. They call them the scouts, 10 to 12 guys, in front, who lead the column going through the mountains. And if they make contact, then they'll order people. They have radios. They'll order people to spread out and counterattack. Okay. The war in the Contra War was very, very much like Vietnam, without all the helicopters, without any semblance of the measure of firepower that they had in Vietnam. It just was not that violent. I've never been to Vietnam, but for everything I know, and the veterans that I'm familiar with, they say it was very, very similar because it was guerrilla warfare, but the firepower just wasn't the same. So anyway, I'm on patrol with these guys, and I'm right behind the scouts, because if I'm too far back in the line, then and if the scouts take contact, and the war was all about ambushes and surprise chance encounters in the mountains, right? That was basically the war. There were very, very few staged battles between two major forces. That almost never happened. Really, really rare. So if I'm right with the scouts, right behind the scouts, 10 or 15 guys, I'm still close enough to the action where I can make pictures of men shooting at other men, trying to kill other men, people getting wounded, people getting killed. If I'm way back in the line, I may hear a bunch of fighting, but I'm never going to have an opportunity to make pictures of it. And I make this point in the book. Print journalism is very, very different in a very, very fundamental way from visual journalism. Okay, because the visual journalists, still photographers, television camera people, documentary filmmakers, we have to be on time and in place when the stuff is really hitting the fan, because that's where the pictures are. Okay. So I place myself behind the scouts generally, because I'm close enough to make pictures of them responding to an ambush, but not too close in the front of the line, that I'll be one of the first guys to get killed. So we're going through the mountains, and some of the guys in the very front are stopped in this long column, and they've got a kid who looks like he's 13, 14 years old. He's got like twine wrapped around one of his arms. He's sitting on a log, and there are a bunch of Sandinistas standing around him. The kid looks frightened. He looks like scared to death, because he's been stopped, and he's being questioned by the Sandinistas about what the hell he's doing running around the mountains by himself. The suspicion is that he's un correo, a runner for the Contras. In other words, a kid that is spotting, okay, holy cow, I'm seeing a bunch of soldiers here. These are Sandinistas. I got to run and tell the Contras what's going on. right? So the Contras could set up an ambush. And that's, you know, he was kind of like one of what the guys in Vietnam call LRPs, and it's an acronym for Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol, LRRP, LRP. And that's what this kid was, basically a LRP. I think he was. So I start to make pictures of him, and they're really, I mean, there's no violence there. They didn't beat him up. You know, nobody's bleeding. He doesn't have, his face is not all messed up. You know, but you can tell he's super poor. He has these rubber boots on. He has no socks on. Pants are all torn up. The dirty, his feet are all muddy. He's scared to hell. And the captain of you know, the commanding officer rolls up and sees this, me making pictures of this kid, and he tells the you know, the guys who have him there, get him the hell out of there and away from me. And so, you know, you suspect, you know, a lot of bad things can be happening. I never published that story because I never published that picture, and I made a lot of pictures of this kid because I knew what could happen as a result of this. I mean, I had no proof about anything that they did bad to this kid. I didn't see them hit him. I didn't see any blood. I didn't, you know. In fact, a couple of days later, and these patrols that I go out, that I used to go out with in the mountains with the Sandinistas and the Contras, they could take a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. The longest time I ever spent in the mountains on one single journey was like 3 weeks. And I came back like 15 pounds lighter. And, you know, that's the kind of life you live up there. But, you know, a couple of days later, I asked the captain, and I said, "Captain, where's the kid?" And he said that they took him to Managua for interrogation. I don't know if that's, I'm hoping, you know, I hope that he's telling me the truth, but I knew it was, I didn't publish that story. I didn't publish that picture until now. It appears in the book. I didn't publish it because I knew what would happen, because the Contra PR people would be all over this thing saying, this is what happens to the poor peasants. You know, the Sandinistas are capturing our kids and turning them into communists, whatever. And it would burn the hell out of me. And I'm being totally frank with you here. It would burn the hell out of me, who at the time had good relations with the Sandinista government. I lived in Nicaragua. My compañera, my girlfriend at the time, soon to become my first wife, worked with the Sandinistas. She came from a very, very respected family. And I would burn all of those bridges if I published that picture. It might have just passed by, maybe not, you know. So I waited to publish the picture. I knew that I couldn't justify publishing that picture just on my suspicion that these guys were going to do something bad to him that I didn't see, with the knowledge that I knew that I would get tremendous pushback by the relationships that I had managed to build with the Sandinista army and Sandinista government. And it was just not worth it. But this was the time, going way back, I think, Kate, was to your original question, why now? I can tell these stories now because they're valid now still, and there are lessons now still from them, and I can say these things now without putting people in trouble. And one of the lessons that I want students to take away from this whole book project is that, you know, look, if you set out to be a journalist because you want to become rich or famous, it's probably better that you go to law school or something, you know?
Yeah.
Because you're probably not going to become rich or famous. It can be dangerous. It's hard work. It's a craft. It's a way of living. It's a way of life. It's a way you approach life. It's a way you deal with life, with other people. It's an extraordinarily rich experience to be a journalist. And the part that makes it richest for me is the people that we come in contact with, you know, and the stories that they allow us to tell, their stories. And that's why I keep doing this stuff after 40 some years of doing it. You know, it's because of the contacts that you make. And I still have relations with a lot of people who are in this book, and that's one of the things that makes it so rich for me, I think. I'm kind of going to run in long, elongated responses to your questions, but go ahead.
No, these are very good, impactful responses. What is something that you think, because you've mentioned that you're an educator with American University, what are some key lessons you would want your students and journalism students studying all over the world to take from your book?
Oh, actually, this is the tangent that I almost missed, and thank you for bringing me back to the central point here. The central point is the people we deal with in these countries. They are, especially the foreign countries where we don't speak the language. I speak Spanish because I've lived in Latin America for a total of 11 years, 4 in Mexico, 7 in Nicaragua. Both of my wives are Spanish speakers, native Spanish speakers. But I've worked in Afghanistan. I don't speak a word of Pashto or Dari, which are the 2 languages that are spoken there. I don't speak. I worked in Iraq. I don't speak Arabic. I don't speak any of the indigenous languages in Africa. So we depend on people there who do speak these languages, who do know the culture, who do know the people, who can get us into places where we want to go and can get us out safely. And these really are too often are the most valuable, but also the most vulnerable people of our craft. I had the misfortune of being on site when 2 of my colleagues were killed, and both of them in El Salvador. And one of them was an English guy, David Blundy, who in 1989 was killed by a sniper, during a major offensive in El Salvador, who just decided that he wanted to take David out one day. It was after a firefight was over, and a bunch of journalists showed up. One shot rings out. David Blundy falls to the ground. And another one was in another time in 1989 when a Dutch cameraman was killed on election day in El Salvador. And with us was a Salvadoran guy who I had used for years as my guy, he was a taxi driver, and his name is Julio. So Julio, every time I'd go to El Salvador, I'd look up Julio, and I'd contract him for however long I was going to be in the country, because he was one of the guys who was really street smart, pretty youngish guy, didn't get scared too easy, was willing to take chances, not crazy chances, but he was willing to take chances. So we're out covering the election. It was in March of 1989, and go to this village that the guerrillas had taken during a firefight early in the morning. They had killed a couple of soldiers. We roll up into the town. We actually heard the shooting from the highway, drove into the town, and we saw a couple of dead soldiers, and the guerrillas still there sitting around, exhausted, burnt out from the battle, and drinking warm Cokes. And the people in the town coming out and looking at the blood all over the place and blah, blah, blah. And pretty soon, the soldiers come back. This was a really big deal. As a matter of fact, I think I sent you the link to this story about this, a video about this. The soldiers come back, and me and a couple of my colleagues, including this Dutch cameraman, are caught in the middle, and including Julio, who was there with his taxi, for God's sake. They come back, and there was fighting, and Cornell was shot and killed. After this, CNN, there was a press conference at the hotel where everybody was staying. CNN covered the press conference. And I'm okay in the sense that no one's going to come after me in the hotel. My colleagues who were there, a couple of colleagues were there, and no one's going to come after them in the hotel, neither guerrillas nor army people. Julio has to go home. And this is a time when the right-wing death squads and the army in El Salvador were accused of killing labor union leaders, political opposition leaders, priests, nuns, servants, suspected kids, because they suspected him of collaborating with the guerrillas. So there's Julio. He goes home to his wife and son, and his wife is really concerned. Well, if they can kill all of these people, and we've got these guys, these journalists on TV talking to CNN saying we think the army shot, we know the army shot Cornell and killed him. What's to stop these guys to come from coming to Julio's place, taking him out to the street and killing him? Nothing. So I went to the American Embassy in El Salvador and tried to get a visa for, to take Julio out of the country, at least for a period of time, so like things cool down, he's things chill out, and he's protected. They wouldn't do that. So on the advice of a colleague who I had worked with before, a Canadian guy actually, he said, go to San Jose. We have a big embassy there. Talk to Mr. So-and-so, and maybe he can arrange something for you. So I did. I went and talked to this guy, and the Canadian government put Julio, his wife, and his son on a plane to Vancouver, set him up in a living space, gave him a job, and helped them have a new life. And too often we forget, because we do our job, when our job is over, when we're kind of like firemen, there's a fire, we go in, cover the fire. When the fire dies down, we pack up our stuff and go. Well, Julio can't pack up his stuff and go home because he already was home. And his wife, I think, was particularly eager to say, hey, Julio, you know what? This place isn't going to be a normal place to raise our son in a long time, if ever. And she said, let's go. And they went, and they're there, and I'm still in touch with Julio. So these are the things that, people like us, we often don't have time to attend to. But I think we should. I think we should be more attentive to these things, and it doesn't have to be this dramatic. You know what I mean? You go to places like Afghanistan right now. There's a big debate going on about all the people who collaborated with American forces, not just American forces, but coalition forces in Afghanistan. The translators, the drivers, the people the guides, all of these people who work with American forces, they've got crosses on their backs now. They got bullseyes on their backs. And what's going to happen when the Taliban comes back into power, which looks like it's going to happen? They're already partly in power now. What happens when they come around and say, hey, man, what were you doing with the Americans? So, it could be, life and death. It could be, hey, am I paying this guy enough money for the hard work that he's doing? Or this woman for enough money for the translation that she's doing? She's getting up early in the morning, going to sleep late at night. These are the things that are part of our job. And it's Dana, to answer your question, these are some of the important points that I want to drill into the heads of my students who are going to these countries, because they really are kind of ambassadors of their country and their craft, because people see them, how they interact with the people on the ground, and they go, oh, this is what Americans are like. They're either cool or they're helpful or they're jerks, or bad people.
So, lessons for your journalism students aside, what are you most excited for the general audience of readers to learn from your book? What do you want readers to take away from it?
I guess the most important thing I want readers to take away from the book is this responsibility that we as Americans have toward countries like Nicaragua, like El Salvador. We have a responsibility to behave properly with them. Some of the reasons why so many Central Americans are trying to cross the border into the United States now are based on, the policies that we employed and executed during the 1980s, decades ago.
Mm.
These places are ungovernable. They're governed by corruption. They're governed by force. You know, um, and it's not just about Central America. I'm talking about all over. If you look around you, we're dealing with a world now that's becoming more and more authoritarian. People like Duterte in the Philippines, Putin in Russia, uh, you know, um, Ortega in Nicaragua, that knucklehead, I can't remember his name right now, who's in Venezuela. Um, you know, it's not getting better. We're in this continued struggle between capitalism, authoritarianism, and democracy. And I think authoritarianism is winning around the world. And we came so close to falling into that same category just a couple of months ago in this country. I don't know that most Americans understand how close we came to becoming, part of this trend of authoritarians ruling their countries. We have people in Congress who blatantly, flagrantly violated the U.S. Constitution, and they're in Congress. A- a- as a nation, I think we have to wake up. We no longer have the moral authority to call up people on the phone and say, hey, you can't detain journalists. You can't disappear journalists. You can't, kill hundreds of people after a peaceful demonstration. What the hell are you doing? You know, and using our political, our moral, our economic power to foster, a better way of life for the majority of the people in these places. It's a
Thank
heavy discussion,
Yeah.
it really is. And I'm not trying to depress you guys. I don't want you going straight out to the bar and saying, give me one of everything, But it's a serious thing, and and another thing, I think it was Kate. You asked me what I want my students to learn. I want them to learn and understand the power and the reward of joining this international conversation that we call journalism. That's what journalism is. It's a conversation with the rest of the world, you know, and e- every day I wake up and I feel so privileged to be able to practice this conversation, to be a part of this conversation, to contribute something. And that's what my work is about. That's what a journalist's work is about. We see these fake journalists now, you know, and again, to push back on this notion of fake news and enemies of the people. You know, it's just so annoying that um, um, we have to have this argument about what's truth and what's not the truth. I mean, that's where this whole thing, that's where we are now. That's the hole that we find ourselves in now in this country, which is, just incredible. I was raised, I mean, I got out of graduate school. um, I guess I finished my coursework, I think, in 76, which was a little bit after, a couple of years after Watergate. But I mean, while I was in what, um, I was close to that whole, Nixon leading office and so forth, and the journalists at that time. Oh my God, they made these films about journalists, and journalists were highly regarded. They were respected. But you have these people now claiming that they're journalists. Um, 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 but they're not. A lot of them aren't.
You're absolutely right. I definitely think it's an important conversation to engage in, and I really appreciate that your book is kind of calling on people to, at the very least, think critically about what's going on today.
We've lost a lot of ability to think critically. Last year and this fall I'll be teaching a course called, it's one of the so-called complex problems courses that American University has initiated, and it's about it's about professors like me selecting a topic through which I want students to learn about critical thinking, about making important decisions concerning the truth, about communication, about diversity, um, you know, about not just about the content of the course, but using the content of that course toward those learning outcomes that I just mentioned. You know, I inherited the course actually from a colleague, and she called it Fight Club, but it's about the U.S. intervention in foreign lands. I call it Why We Fight. And if you haven't seen this film, it's a terrific film. It's a Eugene Jarecki film. It's called Why We Fight. It's a documentary. It's about 7 years old, 6 or 7 years old, maybe a little bit older than that. But it's terrific. It's really terrific, and it explains the thesis of the thing is President Dwight Eisenhower's last speech to the American people before leaving office as President of the United States of America. And he warns Americans. He said, during the past half a century, we've been involved in two great wars, world wars, and to defend our way of life, we've had to establish this thing that we call the military-industrial complex. This was Eisenhower who coined this phrase, okay? And he's warning the American people, and this is a four-star general who helped us win the war. And he's saying that, if we're not vigilant, this military-industrial complex that we had to create to defend ourselves, it's going to undermine our democracy. And that's precisely what's happened. And I use this film as kind of like the thesis, the central point of the course, and take them through the histories of these conflicts: Vietnam, Central America, and the war on terror. Okay, and try to teach them. Okay, the Pentagon was saying this; these politicians were saying that. Muhammad Ali was saying something very, very different. We know what Muhammad Ali said, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. That's the course, and I want them to learn how to decipher information. The basics. Why are these people telling you, that this is the right thing to do, or we have to invade this country, or these people are our enemies? Who's telling you that? What do they have to gain from this? Not enough students are figuring this stuff out. So it's people like me whose responsibility is, and journalists like me, I think, who have to teach people this. Think about, this is why they want you to believe that, because they want to get something out of you. There's something in it for them. You usually have to start thinking about what's in it for them. But we're not enough of us are doing that, I think, and not enough of our young people are understanding this, I think.
Let me just ask you, so Alan Riding, the former New York Times Mexico and Central America bureau chief, spoke about your book and called it a vivid memoir. Can I ask you more about the soundtrack that you've paired with your book? Was that a result of going through this catalog of memories and experiencing everything again, or did you always have this in mind?
You mean the soundtrack?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, I got to tell you that as I wrote Alan, after I read his review, I wrote to him that Alan, that your work has inspired me since before I landed in Mexico City for the first time in 1977, and it continues to do so. That's almost a direct quote from a message that I wrote him after reading his review. Alan Riding was, at the time, not only the New York Times bureau chief for Mexico and Central America, but Alan Riding was kind of like the 007 of foreign correspondents of the entire region. Okay, this guy, he's a brilliant man. He's British. he was stylish, he was young, he was glamorous. He was more connected with sources in Mexico than any 5 journalists that I knew at the time. He was generous with his time. It was from writing that I learned about generosity toward colleagues. One of the tasks that I had to go through when I was taking the foreign correspondence course at Ohio University, and figuring out if I could go to Mexico to work as a foreign correspondent, our class had to write a letter, to correspondents in the region, whichever region they chose, be it South Africa, Argentina, Mexico, whatever. We had to write to people to get information about whether the whole idea of going there to work as a freelancer was a viable idea. I wrote to the AP bureau chief. I wrote to the UPI bureau chief. I wrote to the New York Times bureau chief in Mexico to try to figure out. I'm a graduate student. Am I dreaming, or is it for real? Can I actually go around and make a living out of this? So the AP bureau chief never responded to me. The UPI bureau chief, who I eventually ended up working for, responded, but in a very kind of like short. Here's the answers. Okay, throw it in the mail. This is the time we had to sit in front of a typewriter, bang these questions out. Fold the letter up, put it in an envelope, take it to the post office, and pray that you got something back in a couple of weeks. I never heard from Al in writing for a couple of weeks. Right. So all of a sudden, this letter comes back from Mexico City, and I'm reading this thing, and he starts out with, sorry that I haven't written back to you. I've been on the road lately and seem to never catch up. Something like that. Apologizing for a late response. And then he wrote this. I think I still have the letter, as a matter of fact. It's like 2 or 3 pages long, very detailed, in perfectly Alan writing style, which was beautifully written and just comprehensive and accessible, and just everything that you would expect a guy like Alan writing to write. So. Kate, in response to your question, this is the kind of a guy that Alan Writing was. And for him to say yes to the editor of Revista magazine, the Harvard Review of Latin America, which is where the review was published, for him to say yes, I'll read Gentile's book, and he did, and I can tell because he's quoted. He quotes the book like from beginning to the end. It's a tremendous honor. It's a really tremendous honor. So, your question was about the soundtrack.
It's a very, very roundabout question, so I don't blame you.
The question, the answer is that going through the book, and going through the raw material of the book, that I had scattered around, my office at home and at the university and so forth, going through the pictures, it kind of ignited, the thought about, I want people to see this. I want this to be something special. I want it to be the book about Central America. When people read this thing, I want it to be about, this is the book it's a classic about Central America. God knows if it'll ever be that. I don't know, but I think people will respond to it. And it wasn't me, and I worked with a former student who made the website. We said, I'll put up a website. Nick Ray built a website that it sounds like you took a look at, and I had another student of mine who made the picture of the cover, and he's a brilliant young man. Taylor Michael did that, and I was working with a guy who originally was in Boston, who's a professional designer, Bruce Jones, who's a wonderful guy. I worked with him for many years. He designed my backpack journalism manual. And he said, well, and what I had in the book originally, I took some of the lyrics from a lot of the songs that are in the soundtrack now. I took the lyrics because they broadened the impact of what I was saying with my words, I put them in the book. They were in the text. They were in this thing here. And Bruce is telling me, you're going to get into a lot of trouble, man. They're going to come after you because people just don't, they'll charge you zillions of dollars to put those lyrics in the book, and if you don't pay them, they're going to come after you with lawsuits like crazy. So Bruce says, why don't you just put it in a website, put it in the soundtrack. And it was a brilliant idea, and it's more powerful, I think. It gives a whole different dimension. And I can in my mind, I see people, seeing what's in the book, and they're going to, okay, let's listen to this song by the Who. This is what he was thinking when he wrote this, and it's much more powerful, I think, and it adds an entire new dimension and a new experience for anybody who looks at the book. It's not just reading more words; it's having this, and music is so powerful. Music, I think, is to me kind of like smell is. If you lose your sense of smell, you can't taste food. You have to have smell to be able to taste. And that's what music is to me, to this book. It's like, you can smell it and you can feel this book, I think. So it gives a whole different and a deeper, impression of what this book is about, what I want people to feel when they read it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think also a multimedia aspect of a book is really important today. I definitely have read books in the past and been like, oh, if I would have known, like, this would have been a really good song choice to listen to while reading this chapter. And I like that you've kind of thought ahead and included that into the experience of your readers as well.
Yeah, and you know what? I have to tell you that I spend a lot of time, in the whole region. I like to drive, and this beast that I used to have, La Bestia, I love driving this thing, and I would drive for hours, just looking for stories and stopping to talk with peasants and making pictures, particularly when I was making the book. That I would spend days just driving around the country looking for things and trying to make beautiful pictures, capture moments with people, reach out and touch people's lives and make pictures of it. And sometimes you see yourself as you watch your own movie in your head, and I could see myself, I could see my movie of that process of making the book, that book or this book, listening to certain music that connected somehow with what I was doing at the time, and that process kicked into action while I was writing this, and I knew the kind of music that I listened to when some of the scenes in the book unfolded, and I felt when I was writing the scenes, I felt the music that would deepen the feeling that I was trying to portray in the book. So it was a two-way street, It was music that I felt was applicable to what I was writing, and the other way as well. What I was writing conjured up or brought back to life the memories, the sounds of certain music. You know how it's like. I mean, you probably can think of songs that, oh my God, every time I hear that, I think of him or her or this scene or whatever it was, or that time in my life. It happens with everybody. At least it happens with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. What do you think was the most impactful song as you recalled the stories to write the book? Like,
I'm sorry?
top 3, like the most impactful songs to you.
Oh, I'm a big Springsteen fan, and Springsteen. I'm kind of like I'm kind of like the same breed of person that he is. I mean, I'm not a musician at all. The only thing that I can play is a radio, but he's working class. He's half Italian and half Irish. I'm all Italian. And his father worked. I think his father worked in a mill. My father worked in a mill. I worked in the mill. My brothers worked in the mill. My uncles worked in the mill. So we're, in a lot. I think we deal with a lot of the same issues of the working class in this country, and I'm very proud to be of the working class. I'm cool with it, but it comes with negative connotations as well. As I say in the book, in my family, there are no presidents, no vice presidents, no senators, no congresspeople, no lawyers, no doctors. There aren't even any journalists in my family. You know, um, uh, I mean, now in the extended family, people my age or younger, the children of and the grandchildren of the people who first came in from Italy. Now there are physicians and doctors and lawyers and so forth. Right. But before me, no, there were peasants who came from Italy and worked in the steel mills. That's who my my ancestors are. Um, so you have to deal. I mean, I didn't go to Yale. I didn't go to Harvard. I didn't go to Oxford. I didn't go to any of those places. Um, um, but and I'm okay with that. Um, um, and that's been part of the struggle, actually. Being okay with what you are. It's part of growing up, I guess. And some people make it, and some people don't make it. Growing up, I mean.
All right, to wrap this all up.
You're getting tired of me, right?
No,
No.
we know you're a big man. But what was fun about writing this book for you? I know that you've contacted a lot of former colleagues and friends and family to make sure that everything was correct. So what was the experience really?
I guess one of the most gratifying things is the ability to say thank you, because these things just don't happen. They take this took, I'll tell you, this thing monopolized the better part of a year and a half, 2 years, since I really started at earnest to put this thing together. I mean, there are so many pieces to this thing, not just the raw material, but going through reams of information, putting the stuff together. I hired an editor from one of these agencies that you pay to like read your books before you send them off to self-publish. And it wasn't a good experience. It was a bad experience, as a matter of fact. And he told me that I should get rid of all of the stuff that he says your book is about war photography and combat. He says get rid of all of this stuff about your background, your the ancestors, all the people that came from Italy, and all this stuff. Nobody wants to read about your time in the steel mills in Western Pennsylvania. And I go, what? Is this guy out of his mind or what? But I'm finding out now that what really resonates with people, probably more so because they can understand it more easily, is the stuff. It's precisely the stuff that's close to my heart. The people who are responsible for helping me get to where I am, the people who are in this book, and not just the dead people, and not just the people who are, the soldiers and so forth. It's the people from my hometown, the people who raised me, the people who waited for me. And the book is really an opportunity to say thanks to all those people and to hand them a copy and show that my gratification about being able to include me in this thing. Bingo, there it is. And they're in here. They're all in here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Yeah,
so
well,
now you all have to go out and write books.
Hopefully someday.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, thank you, Bill, so much for sitting down and having this talk with us. Do you want to tell everyone where they can find your book, the website for your book, everything about your book?
Sure. I mean, you can get this book anywhere now. It's you can get it on Amazon. You can get it through Kindle. You can get it through some of the big book distributors worldwide. It's in hardcover, softcover. and digital. And the website, I think, is really cool. It's got information there and background and documents that people might find interesting. When this British correspondent was killed in El Salvador in the fall of 1989, Scotland Yard asked me to write them a long explanation of what happened because they mounted an investigation. And they had me come to Washington to do a video interview about it so that members of their legislature and legal department and so forth could understand what was happening there. And it was a breakthrough in the kind of investigations they do. Those documents are all on the website, as is the soundtrack of the book, which I think again provides a deeper sense of what the book is about and what I'm about, and what those times and those people were about. So I think there are just a lot of lessons for young people, for old people, for anyone who is conscious and awake and curious about the world that we live in.
And that's waitformebook.com. Thank you again, Bill.
You're welcome.
So much.
Thanks for spending time
so
with me. I
much.
appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. We're happy to be here.
Now, who's going to go edit this thing?
I believe that's Thanos.
Okay.